Operating a moving vehicle requires the human brain to process high-velocity spatial data, predict shifting physical boundaries, and execute continuous motor corrections simultaneously. In vestibular rehabilitation, this intense environment provokes a highly specific clinical divergence. One patient with chronic dizziness will report that they actually feel relief when they are behind the wheel, while another patient will find that active driving triggers severe disorientation. We refer to this split in patient presentation as the driver-passenger paradox. Whether a patient thrives in the driver's seat or prefers to sit in the back is a strict neurophysiological marker. It is a direct readout of how their central nervous system is managing sensory deficits. This conceptual model splits vestibular dysfunction into two distinct categories. It separates patients with predictive motor control deficits on the left from those with reactive sensory processing deficits on the right. The left side represents a hardware or prediction failure. This is characteristic of patients with peripheral vestibular hypofunction, where the inner ear itself has sustained structural sensory loss. The right side models a software or processing failure. This profile aligns with persistent postural perceptual dizziness, or PPPD, where the sensory organs are intact, but the brain's integration network is overloaded. Identifying whether your patient operates as a stabilized driver or a provoked driver determines the exact diagnostic coding you will use and dictates two completely different treatment pathways. The high-velocity environment of a vehicle forces a choice on the central nervous system, demonstrating whether the brain's orientation strategy relies on active control or passive filtering. Let's examine Profile 1, the patient presenting with vestibular hypofunction, frequently involving bilateral impairment. During an intake, these patients will consistently report that their driving status is functional. They experience a noticeable reduction in their baseline dizziness when they are actively driving the car. This schematic provides a sagittal view of the brain to show the origin of that symptom relief. When the driver initiates a movement, like turning the steering wheel, the primary motor cortex generates a command. Simultaneously, the brain generates an efference copy. This is an exact internal duplicate of the motor command, designed to anticipate the physical movement before it happens. This internal feed-forward loop routes the copy directly to the vestibular nuclei. By doing so, it effectively bypasses the damaged, inactive peripheral inner ear. According to 2022 research by Van Helvert and colleagues, this predictive steering allows the brain to facilitate a functional reset. The efference copy provides the vestibular nuclei with the necessary data to resolve the impending visual shift without waiting for peripheral confirmation. The active driver also benefits from a secondary grounding component. The steering wheel and pedals provide strong, continuous somatosensory input that the brain employs to anchor its spatial map. The clinical picture inverts completely when this exact same hypofunction patient moves to the passenger seat. In the passenger seat, the patient enters a state of X-afference. They receive passive, high-velocity sensory input from the road, but because they are not steering, there is no motor command generated. Without the predictive efference copy to support the movement, the brain relies entirely on the inner ear to validate the shifting visual world. Because the damaged peripheral system fails to confirm the visual data, a severe sensory mismatch occurs, translating directly into intense dizziness and spatial disorientation. For the hypofunction patient, staying in the driver's seat provides a strict mechanical advantage. They must use active motor control to bypass their sensory deficit and maintain orientation. Profile 2 requires a different diagnostic approach. These are patients presenting with persistent postural perceptual dizziness or high visual dependency. Their presentation is the paradox of Profile 1. Active navigation and driving serve as their primary provocations, frequently causing them to report feeling highly symptomatic behind the wheel. These patients possess intact peripheral signaling. Their struggle lies in how the brain prioritizes and weights competing sensory inputs during active navigation. To understand their threshold, we have to look at the massive visual flow the driver must process in real time. The rapid movement of passing cars and road flow generates high levels of vection, the illusion of self-motion. Processing this creates a heavy optokinetic demand on the central nervous system. Look at this sensory overlay. A hypersensitive brain treats this high-intensity focal and peripheral visual processing as a high-priority threat, leading to optokinetic overload. Ainsworth's 2023 research on motorist disorientation syndrome demonstrates that in these central and functional cases, the visual signaling from the road actually overtakes the patient's motor commands. This creates an active burden. The very act of trying to steer and correct the car generates a continuous feedback error loop, pushing the nervous system further into a symptomatic spiral. Clinicians frequently observe that these patients find significant relief by simply moving to the rear of the vehicle. Moving to the rear of the car achieve relief through visual occlusion. By sitting in the rear, the physical interior of the car restricts their peripheral field of view, blocking out the optokinetic flow. The patient uses the front seats as a stable visual frame. This allows the brain to ignore the provocative external stimuli and rapidly reduce the threat level in the central processing centers. For the PPPD patient, active navigation exponentially increases cognitive load. The inability to filter optokinetic noise results in the total collapse of their internal spatial map. These divergent experiences differentiate between a failure of sensory input and a failure of sensory integration. This two-column diagnostic summary organizes the clinical findings. On the left, the hypofunction profile represents a prediction failure, where driving serves as a necessary functional compensatory strategy. For these patients, therapy must support their recovery by using intact motor pathways to facilitate gaze stability and coordinate their physical space. On the right, the PPPD profile represents a processing failure, where active driving induces unmanageable sensory overload. Their treatment requires clinicians to facilitate the filtering of optokinetic flow, retraining the brain to weight somatosensory inputs more heavily than visual data. Identifying these specific maladaptive strategies early allows clinicians to abandon generalized vestibular exercises. It ensures you provide targeted interventions engineered specifically for the neurophysiological deficits occurring in the patient's internal microenvironment. By accurately distinguishing between these two driving profiles, clinicians can select interventions that target the specific neurological failure, ensuring a safer return to the road.